I'm a 57-year-old guy, and once upon a time, I thought I hit the jackpot marrying Karen, the woman I cherished for 26 long years. We'd known each other since college, been friends for a decade before we finally got hitched. Those 10 years? They were a mix of 2 years of just being friends, a year of me chasing after her, and then 7 years of dating. We even survived a few years of long distance because of work relocations. Back then, I thought nothing could shake the bond we built through time and distance. Karen wasn't just my wife or the mother of our kids. She was my best friend. Since our college days, she seemed to understand me better than anyone ever had. And maybe that's why her betrayal hit me harder than I could have imagined. Just last week, Karen and I went to our college reunion. Our alma mater throws one of these big reunion events every year, honoring classes that graduated 35 years ago. It's a huge deal, complete with musical performances and celebrity guests. This year, it was our class's turn to celebrate. Karen and I were really looking forward to it because we were one of the few couples that had married and stuck it out all these years. We walked into that reunion, ready to show off our lasting relationship, completely oblivious to the storm waiting to hit us. We were having a great time, catching up with old friends we hadn't seen in ages. Felt like we were transported back to the good old days. Then, out of nowhere, someone approached us. Let's call him Sam. Now, Sam's always been obsessed with Karen, and everyone knew it back then. She was one of the most beautiful and intelligent women in our class, and of course, she had her share of admirers. I was one of them once, too. But Sam? He was different. He wasn't the kind to flirt and move on. He was relentless. Even back in college, when Karen was dating me, he kept trying to win her over, no matter how clear it was that she wasn't interested. I've never been the jealous type, so his desperate attempts never really got to me. Heck, everyone knew Karen was out of his league, including Sam. But that didn't stop him. After Karen and I got married, he even had the audacity to send me a text, saying she'd made a mistake and that he hoped I'd take care of her as well as he would have. Karen and I just laughed at the time, brushing off his delusions, and we hadn't heard from him since, until that reunion. When Sam walked up to us, we figured he'd finally moved on. 35 years had passed since college, and Karen and I had been married for 26 of those years. But to our shock, Sam was still hung up on her. He greeted us with this awkward hug, while Karen, looking clearly uncomfortable, only offered him a handshake. He sat down across from her, staring at her in this really unsettling way, something I didn't miss. I tried to make conversation, asked if he had his family with him. He told me he was single, and mentioned a short-lived marriage in his 40s that ended in divorce. I gave him a polite, "Sorry to hear that," but what he said next caught me off guard. "Yeah, you should be sorry. You stole my love," he said, then burst into this weird, hysterical laughter. If I'd been younger, I might have reacted more strongly, but at almost 60, you learn to let things like that slide. Sam was never intimidating anyway. More of a sleazy loudmouth, the kind you wouldn't even pick for a team sport. His comment was awkward, and it made everyone uncomfortable, so we just brushed it off. But I noticed Karen wasn't her usual self after that. She went quiet. Our close friends, Jennifer and VJ, noticed too. They pulled Karen aside, probably to help her shake it off. Karen's always been the type to overthink everything, so we figured she needed some reassurance. Then, out of the blue, Sam came back. I had a feeling he'd been watching us the whole time. He apologized, claiming he didn't mean to upset Karen and said he just wanted her to be happy, despite all the years that had passed. His phony, sappy words made my skin crawl. I told him to back off. He kept on with his apologies, practically begging Karen to forgive him so we could all have a good time. His act was so pathetic that I figured it was best to just move on and try to enjoy the night. Karen, to my surprise, hugged him, telling him it was time to move on and let the past go. We all hugged it out and hit the dance floor, turning the night into a bit of a party. It seemed like we'd all moved past the weirdness. After a while, I saw Jennifer and Karen chatting with Sam, who was acting like a fool. It seemed harmless enough, so I let my guard down. I watched them from a distance, making sure Karen was okay. At one point, I saw Sam whisper something in her ear. She smiled and nodded, and I figured it was nothing serious, or Karen would have reacted differently. I thought it was safe to leave them be and mingle with some other old friends. About an hour later, I realized that Karen and Jennifer were nowhere to be found. At first, I didn't think much of it. We were all mingling, catching up with old friends, and losing track of time. But as the minutes ticked by and neither Karen nor Jennifer reappeared, I started to get a bit uneasy. I tried calling them both, but of course, with the loud music blaring all around, their phones probably didn't even register my calls. After another 30 minutes, Karen finally returned, but something about her was off. She looked the same on the outside, but I could just sense something had changed. She was unusually quiet, and she kept insisting that we leave. Jennifer came back shortly after, but the two of them barely exchanged a glance for the rest of the evening. I figured they must have had some sort of disagreement, maybe a petty argument or something, because they were avoiding each other like the plague. I kept pressing Karen, asking her why she was so upset and why she wanted to leave so early, but she just stayed quiet. I wanted to stay until the party wrapped up, but Karen wasn't having it. She was determined to leave. On the drive home, an hour in total, she didn't say a word. I kept asking if she was all right, but all she'd say was that she was tired and needed some rest. That wasn't like her at all. Karen's usually so full of energy, always up for a late night out, so her sudden exhaustion had me worried. I asked if her mood had anything to do with Jennifer, but she just said no, and that was the end of it. I assumed she was just worn out, so I dropped it and left her alone when we got home. Meanwhile, most of our friends were still buzzing on social media, posting happy pictures from the reunion, talking about how great the night was. But Karen, she slipped right into bed, barely looking at me, and pretended to fall asleep. I knew she wasn't really asleep though. She was just avoiding talking about whatever was bothering her. It was almost 2 a.m. by the time I finally crawled into bed, completely exhausted. I was out cold the moment my head hit the pillow. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when Karen woke me up, her face soaked with tears. She rested her head on my chest, and I instinctively held her, asking if she was feeling emotional from seeing all our old friends again. She didn't say a word, just kept crying like her heart was breaking. I held her close, trying to comfort her, even though I had no idea what was wrong. I figured she'd talk when she was ready. Eventually, when her sobbing subsided, she dropped a bombshell I never saw coming. She admitted she had cheated on me with Sam. I was absolutely stunned, like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I couldn't even speak. My mind was racing, trying to piece it all together. The last time I'd seen Karen that night, she was dancing with Sam and Jennifer. Then they'd all disappeared for about an hour, and when Karen came back, she'd been acting strange, insisting we leave. Now, it all made sense. Karen explained, through more tears, that Jennifer knew about the affair and had been furious with her, which explained their tension earlier. I was still in complete shock, struggling to say anything, so Karen just kept talking, spilling out the whole story. She told me how Sam had kept apologizing while they danced, feeling embarrassed about his earlier behavior. He started showering her with compliments, telling her he'd never met anyone like her in all his travels. At some point, Karen said she started to believe him. His words seemed to get to her, and she admitted she fell for his flattery. Sam had asked her to take a walk with him, and though she initially said no, he pressed on, saying it would be their last chance to talk and that she deserved to hear how he truly felt. Against her better judgment, she agreed to go with him for a walk across the college lawn, hoping for some quiet. Once they were out there, Sam laid it on thick, telling her he'd always been in love with her, that she was the most amazing woman in the world. Karen said she felt overwhelmed by his words, like she was in some kind of trance, and foolishly, she gave in to him. She told me he took her hand, and in that moment, she felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. I won't go into the graphic details, but she confessed to everything, down to the guilt that hit her halfway through, causing her to push him away. I just sat there, numb, my body frozen. Karen kept nudging me, looking for a reaction, but I had nothing to say. I asked her to give me a moment to process it all. She started crying again, apologizing over and over. Eventually, I told her to go to sleep, that we'd talk more in the morning. She clung to me like her life depended on it, terrified I'd walk out. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't stop my mind from replaying everything over and over. I remembered something that sent a fresh wave of anger through me. Sam's unsettling grin when Karen had returned earlier. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now I realized it was a victory smile, like he'd finally won. That realization made my stomach churn with disgust. I couldn't stand to lie next to her any longer. She eventually fell into a deep sleep, worn out from hours of crying. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, packed a few things. My laptop, my wallet, the essentials, into a backpack and left the house. I loved her, God knows I did. After 26 years together, I couldn't even picture a life without her. We had a family, 2 kids. But I couldn't stay. I knew her too well. If I stayed until morning, she'd find a way to talk me into staying. So, I checked into a hotel, blocked her number, and shut down all our social media connections. By the time I managed to fall asleep, the sun was already starting to rise. Around 8 or 9 a.m., my phone started going off with calls from our kids. We've got 2, our son, who's 24, and our daughter, who's 21. Both of them are in college, living on the same campus. Looking back now, I can admit I acted on impulse by leaving that night. I should have thought things through, maybe come up with a plan instead of just disappearing. I've read about people who pretend everything's fine while secretly plotting revenge or gathering evidence. But in my case, I couldn't fake it. Karen wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend. And even if I wanted to deceive her, she'd have seen right through me. I couldn't play that kind of game. The thought of Karen cheating on me was the last thing I ever could have imagined. So I didn't have any kind of plan for dealing with something like this. When my phone started buzzing with calls from our kids, I had no clue what to say, but I knew I had to answer before they got worried enough to call the police and report me missing. I decided to call my son first. He's the more level-headed one, much more mature than his sister. When he picked up, I told him there was no easy way to say it. His mother had cheated on me the night before with that guy. Sam, her old admirer, stalker, whatever you want to call him. I explained that I needed some time to wrap my head around it all. He was stunned. I could tell he was in complete disbelief, struggling to process that his mom, the woman who helped raise him, had done something so out of character. We were always known as the solid, loving family, the one everyone looked up to. Our kids, relatives, friends. They all admired us for how close-knit we were, how we'd stuck together through thick and thin. And now, in one night, that image had been shattered. My son couldn't understand how his mother could do something like this. He kept insisting that there had to be some mistake, some misunderstanding. He pressed for details, wanting me to explain everything step by step, but I knew that laying it all out for him would crush him. He's only 24, just starting out in life, and I didn't want to break his spirit before he'd even had a chance to live. I told him I wished it was some horrible joke. But the truth was, Karen had admitted everything to me. My son had been through heartbreak before, but this hit him differently. It was his own family unraveling. I asked him to keep it to himself for now, not to share it with anyone until I was ready. I shot my daughter a quick text, telling her I was dealing with some work stress and would be out of town for a bit. That seemed to stop the flood of calls from her. So that's where things stood. My daughter thought I was away on business, but my son and Karen both knew I'd separated from her. Over the next few days, I buried myself in research, trying to find the best lawyers, the best way to deal with the mess my life had become. That's when I stumbled across this online community of men who'd gone through exactly what I was dealing with. I read their stories about how they plotted their revenge, how they confronted their cheating partners, even going after the other guy in some cases. And I got it, I understood the anger. But even though I was furious with Karen, revenge wasn't what I wanted. I still loved her. I wish I didn't, but I did. And I wasn't about to destroy her life, even after what she did. At the same time, I knew I couldn't be with her anymore. There was no going back, no reconciliation. Not for me. I wasn't sure how I was going to move forward or if I'd ever be the same again. I had too many responsibilities, my work, my kids, our assets. I made an appointment with a lawyer the next day to see what my options were. I'll keep you all posted once I know more. Thanks, everyone, for all the support. I've been reading through your comments, and I realized there are a few things I didn't mention earlier. Both Karen and I used to be management consultants, but we quit our full-time jobs in our late 40s. Karen decided to pursue her passion for writing, and I started working as a business consultant for startups. Since I'm self-employed, I don't have a fixed office, which answers a question a few of you had about Karen showing up at my workplace. I split my time between home and visiting clients, and fortunately, Karen hasn't been able to track me down yet. As I said before, I'm nearing 60, and we've been planning our retirement for a while. We've been saving to buy a beach house in the countryside, something we'd planned to do next year. We'd even picked out a few properties and started negotiations. Thankfully, we hadn't made the purchase yet. Otherwise, it would have added another layer of complications. Since the night I left, Karen's been trying to get in touch with me, but I've ghosted her completely. After meeting with the lawyer, I was advised to sit down with the kids and be upfront with them, especially since they're adults now. We also discussed the division of property. I decided to go for a fair split, half for me, half for her. No, I wasn't going to use this divorce to try and take everything from Karen. She's earned her share of our assets, and honestly, she's earned the separation too. I know her too well. She'd probably be willing to give up her share if it meant keeping the family together. But I'm not going to play that game. As the divorce paperwork started coming together, I reached out to my kids. I asked my son to bring his sister to a restaurant, without telling her that I'd be there. He agreed. When my daughter saw me, she was immediately upset, bombarding me with questions. One of the first things she asked was if I was cheating on Mom, since she knew I'd cut off contact with Karen. Her anger hit me hard, but I had to stay strong for what was coming. I calmed her down and reassured her that no, I wasn't involved with anyone else. Then, slowly, I broke the news. My son already knew, but even he didn't know the full extent of what I'd been planning. When my daughter found out that her mom had cheated on me, she was devastated. She'd been living with Karen for the past 2 weeks, ever since I left. She threw her arms around me and apologized for being mad, for not knowing what was really going on. Both of my kids asked me if there was any chance I'd reconsider, if I could try to work things out with their mother, but I told them straight, I was moving forward with the divorce. Watching my kids break down in front of me was one of the hardest things I've ever gone through. But despite their tears, they understood. They knew my pain and promised to support me, no matter what. I reassured them that while I was leaving their mother, I wasn't leaving them. My daughter told me Karen hadn't been eating or sleeping, that she was a wreck, crying constantly, pacing around, trying to contact me. She'd even gone to several of my clients' offices, trying to track me down, but none of them had seen me in weeks. My daughter said that when she asked Karen what had happened, Karen wouldn't answer. She just shut herself in her room. I asked my daughter to stay with her mom until the divorce was finalized. I could see the pain in both my kids turning into anger as we talked about Karen. They felt just as betrayed as I did. The family they knew and loved was falling apart, and they knew exactly who was to blame. Still, I didn't want them to hate their mother, so I made sure to encourage them to support her, even though she had let us all down. Then, out of nowhere, something strange happened. A few days later, I got a text from Sam. He had the nerve to ask about Karen, even going so far as to say that if I was divorcing her, he'd be happy to step in and be with her. I just told him Karen was free to do whatever she wanted and then blocked him. I wasn't going to let him get under my skin. The way I saw it, he wasn't the one who had betrayed me. Karen was. I didn't marry or trust Sam. If Karen wanted him, she could have him. I didn't care anymore. Today, the divorce papers were set to be delivered, and I was waiting for my daughter's call to hear how Karen reacted. In the meantime, I had a lot to sort through, figuring out my assets, planning for retirement, and making sure my kids were okay through all this mess. Hey everyone. I know it's been a while since my last update, and I'm sorry for that. Life's been hectic. First off, the divorce is finalized. When Karen got the papers, she didn't take it well at all. She'd been living in some kind of fantasy world, convinced I was just mad and that I'd come back after I cooled down. But once she got those papers, that bubble popped. She demanded to meet with me, but my lawyer shut it down. He told her she was getting half of everything, which was more than she deserved. Karen didn't care about the money, though. She said she didn't want any of the assets, just me. The truth is, I knew exactly what she was trying to do. She wanted a face-to-face meeting because she thought she could sway me, make me reconsider. And honestly, she was probably right. If I'd seen her, I might have caved. I still loved her, as much as I wish I didn't. It hurt me to know she was suffering. But at the end of the day, I had to hold on to my self-respect. Karen had taken me for granted and ripped our family apart. I couldn't live like that. Then my daughter called, saying she needed to meet urgently. She told me that Karen's condition had worsened to the point where she'd ended up in the hospital. She'd fallen into a deep depression, wasn't eating, wasn't taking her meds or even basic supplements. The doctors had put her on a liquid diet because she refused to eat anything solid. Now, I know some people might think I'm cold-hearted, that I must have never truly loved Karen to be able to walk away like this. But here's the thing, unless you've been through the kind of betrayal I have, you can't possibly understand the pain I'm dealing with. For nearly 3 decades, I was Karen's biggest fan. I loved her deeply, stood by her, and was always there to lift her up. She was the mother of my children, and Sam wasn't wrong when he said she was a rare find. Karen's smart, talented, and empathetic. She was everything I could have asked for in a wife. I treated her like the incredible woman she was, and how did she repay me? By cheating on me when I was at my most vulnerable. I never in a million years thought she'd betray me, and certainly not with Sam. A few days after Karen got the divorce papers, Jennifer reached out to me. She wanted to check in and see how I was holding up, and she asked about Karen. I told her we were officially separating. Jennifer wasn't shocked. She said she already knew why. Later, she called me again, this time asking how I found out about the affair. I told her Karen had confessed everything to me. Jennifer sounded regretful and admitted she had tried to warn Karen about Sam. She told Karen not to go anywhere with him, but Karen hadn't listened. Then Jennifer shared something that shifted my whole perspective. Her version of events didn't exactly line up with what Karen had told me. According to Jennifer, everything seemed fine at first. They were dancing and having fun when Sam joined them and started getting a little too close to Karen. He whispered something in her ear. Karen had said it was an apology, but Jennifer noticed Karen didn't seem bothered by his presence. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. When Sam suggested they go for a walk, Karen looked to Jennifer, almost as if seeking permission. Jennifer was uncomfortable with the whole situation and advised Karen not to go, reminding her how weird Sam could be. But Karen went with him anyway. Jennifer wasn't too worried at first. She thought Karen could handle herself. But when she didn't come back after a while, Jennifer went looking for them. She found them in the college swimming pool's changing room, not out on the lawn like Karen had told me. They were caught in the act, and they didn't stop until Karen saw Jennifer approaching. So, it wasn't Karen's guilt that made her stop. It was Jennifer walking in on them. Up until that moment, I still had a sliver of respect for Karen. At least she had been honest about her mistake, or so I thought. But after hearing Jennifer's side, I knew that wasn't true. Karen hadn't stopped because she felt guilty or because she'd had a moment of clarity. She stopped because she got caught. Jennifer's version confirmed I had made the right choice in going through with the divorce. Learning the full truth gave me the closure I needed. Despite everything, I had clung to Karen's story. I wanted to believe she got carried away by alcohol, that she stopped because her conscience kicked in. But hearing Jennifer's account laid it all bare. Karen didn't cheat because she was drunk or lost control. She did it because she wanted to. The swimming pool was a 15-minute walk from where we were, and the changing rooms were tucked away inside the building. This wasn't some spontaneous mistake. It was a decision, plain and simple. Jennifer asked if I could ever see myself giving Karen another chance, thinking that maybe Karen had been completely truthful. But I didn't bother correcting her. Jennifer didn't know that Karen had lied to me about the entire night. Despite Karen's miserable state, her lies had sealed my decision. And that's when I realized I didn't just lose love for Karen. I lost all respect for her too. In the meantime, my kids told me that Karen was on the verge of self-harm. That news hit me hard. I immediately called Jennifer and explained that Karen had given me a different story from what she knew. I asked Jennifer to visit Karen and have an honest conversation with her. I told Jennifer to let Karen know that I was aware of the full truth and had no intention of forgiving her. I could see Karen was hurting herself as a way to win me back, and I wanted Jennifer to make sure she understood that her health needed to be her priority, not reconciliation. Jennifer agreed and later gave me an update after visiting Karen. While Karen wasn't fully back to herself, my daughter mentioned that she was doing better, which was a bit of a relief. Karen had signed the divorce papers, and I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. Now, I'm trying to wrap up my work and get ready for a new chapter. I've decided against settling in one place. Staying put would drive me nuts. I know I haven't handled everything perfectly, but I've done the best I could. Now, it's time to see where life takes me. Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. It's been a year since my last update, and I wish I could say the time has flown by, but honestly, it hasn't. I spent the first few months living in a motel, then rented a condo until my divorce was finalized. As for work, I've slowly shifted to clients I can handle remotely. As for the retirement money, Karen got half of it, and I gave the other half to my kids. I don't need it, and I trust them to make good use of it. Karen, from what I hear, is still in therapy. Jennifer keeps in touch with her regularly and occasionally checks on me too. Recently, Jennifer told me something that really took me by surprise. Even though I'd always said I knew Karen better than anyone, this bit of news made me wonder if I ever truly knew her at all. I always thought of Karen as strong, resilient, someone who could handle whatever life threw at her. But loneliness got the better of her. Apparently, after I left, Karen started talking to Sam again. He kept telling her he loved her, up until he found out about our divorce. Then, just like that, he ghosted her. Karen was devastated to realize Sam's intentions weren't what she thought. He wasn't interested in anything more than a casual fling and told her he already had a live-in partner. Karen was heartbroken by his betrayal, sinking even deeper into her depression. The last update I got about Karen was a couple of weeks ago. My daughter had been staying with her ever since I left to help her cope. But after a year of living with Karen, my daughter decided she couldn't take it anymore. The woman who had once been so emotionally strong had become insecure, erratic, and constantly seeking validation. She started smothering my kids, bombarding them with calls and texts if they didn't respond right away. She even tried convincing my son to move in with her until he got married, which, of course, he refused. As for my daughter, Karen pressured her to stay home instead of living her life. Going out with friends or even taking a vacation was met with resistance. Whenever my daughter tried to talk to Karen about her behavior, Karen would break down, terrified that she was going to lose her kids the same way she lost me. My children tried to reassure her that they weren't abandoning her, but they also warned her that if she kept this up, they'd have no choice but to pull away. That led to some heated arguments, with both of them pointing out that her actions were tearing apart what was left of our family. Karen didn't want to accept that her own children were holding her accountable for what had happened. 2 weeks ago, my daughter made the tough decision to move out. She told me she had done everything she could to help her mother, but she couldn't put her life on hold any longer. And honestly, I think she made the right call. Karen needs to figure things out on her own, and my daughter deserves to live her own life without being weighed down by her mom's struggles. You know, a lot of people might find some twisted satisfaction in seeing their ex-wife suffer after cheating on them, especially when they're younger, maybe in their 20s or 30s. But for me, I don't take any joy in this. I actually feel sorry for Karen. Her choices led her to this, and now she's stuck dealing with the consequences. I just hope she can find a way to rebuild herself, to become the strong, independent woman I once knew. Someone who doesn't need validation from people like Sam. As for me, I've spent the last year traveling, living in 4 different countries, soaking up new cultures, trying new foods, and experiencing life in a way I never had before. It's been a rewarding journey. At first, I was disappointed that my retirement plans had gone off track. I had pictured myself spending these years peacefully with Karen, but now I found a different kind of fulfillment by embracing all these new experiences. I've met some amazing people along the way, too. Just to clarify, I haven't gotten into any new relationships, and I'm not looking for one. I'm just letting life unfold as it will. And if something happens, I'll let you all know. Hey everyone, it's been a few years since my last update, and I apologize for going silent. Honestly, Not much has happened in the last 2.5 years, aside from more travel and rekindling my love for painting. I know this thread started as a way for me to share my story about Karen's infidelity, and I didn't think it was worth updating with my travel adventures, so I didn't. But something has happened recently that I felt was important enough to share. Last month, after 4 long years, I saw Karen again. The occasion? My son's wedding. Yes, he found the love of his life and decided to get married. About 2 months before the big day, he called me and expressed how much it meant for Karen and me to meet his future in-laws before the ceremony. At first, I was hesitant. I suggested we could just meet at the wedding itself. But then it hit me, this wasn't about me. It was about being there for my son, fulfilling my role as his father. So, despite my reservations, I agreed to go to the dinner hosted by the bride's parents a week before the wedding. I hadn't even confirmed my attendance until the last minute, but I showed up anyway. Seeing Karen again, especially in this context, wasn't easy. Honestly, I would have preferred if just one of us had gone, but I knew I had to be there for my son. When I arrived, Karen looked surprised. She had changed, and it wasn't just her appearance. Her eyes told me she'd been through a lot. She greeted me with a polite smile, but I could tell she was tense. The whole evening, she kept mostly to herself. But when we finally had a private moment, she told me I looked healthier and happier. I simply replied that cutting all the toxicity out of my life tends to have that effect. That caught her off guard, and she quickly glanced around to make sure no one else heard. She then asked if I was in a relationship. I dodged the question, telling her it wasn't her concern anymore. I barely made eye contact with her, keeping my focus on the others in the room. When the dinner wrapped up and it was time to leave, I said my goodbyes to everyone with a hug. But when it came to Karen, I just gave her a nod and told her to take care. I don't think she was expecting that. She even stood up as I was saying goodbye to everyone else, but it all happened so fast that it didn't come off as too awkward for anyone watching. Honestly, the whole interaction with Karen was uneventful. She seemed either too intimidated or too anxious to start a real conversation. Whether she was overthinking things or not, I didn't dwell on it. After the dinner, my son walked me out and asked if I wanted to stay with him for the next few days. I thanked him but declined, telling him I'd call him soon. Then I drove back to my hotel. For context, I don't have a permanent residence anymore. I'm on the road most of the time, and when I'm in town, I stay in a motel. It's been a big shift, going from being a family man for 26 years to living this nomadic lifestyle, but I've gotten used to it, and honestly, I'm loving the freedom it brings. Now, aside from the family situation, there's something else I need to share. I've got a companion now. 2 years ago, when I was in Tokyo, I met Ashleen. She's 52 and had just come out of an abusive relationship. She was on her first solo trip, and we connected while hiking a mountain trail. At the time, neither of us was looking for anything romantic, and we became friends. After Tokyo, I headed to South Korea while she went to Thailand, but we kept in touch. For the next 6 months, we planned our travels together. For the past year and a half, we've explored 8 different countries together. At first, we took it slow. Neither of us wanted to rush into anything physical or emotional. We were clear from the start that neither of us wanted marriage. Right now, we're just enjoying traveling and discovering new places. My kids know about Ashleen, but they've kept her a secret from Karen, worrying it might send her spiraling back into depression. After I got back to my hotel from the dinner, I called my son to explain why I didn't stay with him. I told him Ashleen had come with me, and I didn't want to leave her alone. I also mentioned I wanted Ashleen to be at the wedding, and though my son was happy, he was understandably concerned about how Karen would react. I made it clear that Ashleen was my partner now, and she deserved to meet the family. My son looped in my daughter on the call, and we all agreed Ashleen should attend. The wedding was a week away, so I used that time to show Ashleen around since it was her first visit to Kentucky. On the wedding day, as soon as we arrived, I noticed Karen watching us. She looked visibly upset when she saw me holding hands with Ashleen. I had already prepared Ashleen for the possibility of Karen causing a scene, but Ashleen assured me she could handle it. And it didn't take long for Karen to make her move. She stormed over, grabbed my wrist, and tried to pull me aside. I stood firm and told her I wasn't interested in having a private conversation. Karen then asked if Ashleen was my girlfriend and if I planned to marry her. I told her again that my personal life wasn't her concern and asked her to leave us alone. By that time, guests were arriving, and some of them noticed Karen's tears and growing anger. She insisted she didn't care about the others and said we needed to settle this now. But I wasn't going to be dragged into her drama, especially not at our son's wedding. My daughter stepped in at that moment, trying to calm her mother down, but Karen wasn't having it. She refused to leave with her, making a scene and insisting she didn't care that she was disrupting the wedding. Then, something I never expected happened. My gentle daughter, the one who always stayed composed, turned into a force I didn't know she had in her. She didn't just lose her temper. She delivered a stern, no-nonsense speech that caught everyone off guard. In a firm, quiet voice that carried more weight than a shout ever could, she told Karen, "You were supposed to walk into the wedding on Dad's arm and be with him, but you chose to be with some random guy. So either accept the reality and move on right now, or I'll make sure you're thrown out before the ceremony even starts." I nearly stepped in, as any parent would when they see their child in distress, but I held back. My daughter was stronger than I ever was when it came to dealing with Karen. She stood there, unwavering, pointing at her mom with every word carrying the weight of years of pain and frustration. Karen's grip on my wrist loosened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of emotion on her face. Anger, betrayal, sadness, all flashing across her features. She stared at me for a few seconds, but instead of saying anything, she just let go and walked away. She didn't even try to introduce herself to Ashleen after that. On the bright side, my daughter turned to Ashleen and apologized, but Ashleen hugged her right away, telling her there was nothing to apologize for. I reassured my daughter too. She's strong, and I couldn't be prouder of her. After the heated moment, she quietly said to me, "It's on her, Dad. We've been through enough. She either moves on, or she needs to leave you alone." Karen had caused so much misery for everyone, yet she still clung to the hope that people would offer her sympathy. But my daughter was right. It was time for Karen to let go. The rest of the wedding went smoothly, but Karen spent most of the time off in a corner, looking more excluded than a mother of the groom should be. It was clear she was upset that our children were standing by me. She didn't even join us for the family photos, and I think that hurt her more than she let on. A few days later, Jennifer called me and said that Karen had been taking my moving on so quickly as a blow to her ego, especially since she remained single. I told Jennifer that my kids and I were done with Karen's drama. She's free to live her life as she pleases, but I'm focused on enjoying the rest of my years in peace. I've started thinking about staying closer to my kids, maybe even providing them with a family home for future gatherings, even though they're all grown up now. The wedding made me realize that I'm entering a new chapter in life, and one day, I might even become a grandparent. That's a chapter I'm not planning on sharing with Karen, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Maybe Ashleen will be open to settling down when the time comes. I'm grateful for the advice and support I've received, and I hope all of you stay loyal and true to your partners. Not just for yourselves, but for your children as well. Life's good, and there's always something new to look forward to. Feel free to leave your thoughts below, and goodbye for now.